Welcome to The Economy Magazine at I-24 News, where we take a look at the world markets and the global economy. I'm Natalie Ehrlich. Well, coming up today, Iran is back in business for now. The lifting of Iran sanctions marks an important moment. We highlight the economic impact for Iran and the world. And China. One side effect of the slowing economy is the rise in labor movements. However, the trend is not taken lightly by its government. First, we'll start with the headlines. Well, Asian markets closed mostly lower Monday. Japan's Nikkei fell a bit over 1%. China's Shanghai climbed 0.47%, and the Hang Seng tanked 1.45%. Meanwhile, in Europe, stocks there rebounded at the start of trading as oil dropped to 2003 lows. But by the afternoon, the German DAX was down 0.16%, London's FTSE dipped 0.08%, and the French CAC fell 0.17%. Oil, meanwhile, extended its slide Monday below $30 a barrel. Traders expect a new glut of oil from Iran as international sanctions are lifted. Brent crude on London Exchange fell to $28.64 a barrel. At the New York Mercantile, Brent sweet crude declined to $29.11 a barrel. Some analysts say that in the coming weeks, oil prices could hit $25 a barrel. Still, actual oil output from Iran could take several months. The drop in prices is perhaps more pressured now by the fears than a real influx of supply. Well, a new poll suggests that Hillary Clinton's lead over Bernie Sanders has widened. The former Secretary of State now leads Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders 59% to 34%, slightly higher than the 19-point gap in December. Well, some of the sharpest exchanges between these two Democratic candidates took place on Sunday during the final Democratic debate. Sanders drove central point from his campaign, the influence of billionaires and big money donors in Washington. Clinton criticized Sanders' approach on gun restrictions as well as on health care.
I have to say I'm not sure whether we're talking about the plan you just introduced tonight or we're talking about the plan you introduced 9 times in the Congress. But the fact is, we have the Affordable Care Act.
French automaker Renault is now set to appear before a government panel Monday to explain why some of its cars have exceeded emissions limits. France's Environment and Transport Minister launched that commission last October following the massive Volkswagen scandal. Renault was one of 100 cars to be tested. Now, news of that probe sent Renault shares sharply lower last Thursday and Friday, even as the company reported global sales rose 3.3% in 2015, thanks to strong demand from the European market. Well, China's new development bank is open for business and will lend in dollars. The surprise move means Beijing won't use the bank as a platform to promote the renminbi. Analysts say the renminbi lending would have presented challenges as most member nations likely contributed equity in dollars. Well, Iran is back in business as more than a decade-long sanctions are lifted, and Daniel Roth examines what this means for Tehran and its economy.
After Iran and the P5+1 group of major world powers signed a deal last summer to curb the former's nuclear program, the International Atomic Energy Agency announced late last week that they were satisfied with Iran's steps forward so far. This was followed over the weekend by a major announcement.
The United States and the EU will immediately lift nuclear-related sanctions, expanding the horizon of opportunity for the Iranian people.
The deal will allow the flow of tens of billions of dollars in Iranian resources and begin the flow of foreign assets into the country as investors get used to the new reality. But Iran's road back to the international market will be a long one. President Hassan Rouhani was elected 3 years ago in part as a more Western-friendly leader with a mandate to begin to break down barriers with the West. This deal is seen by many as the first stage in revamping Iran's weak economy.
Domestic demand has been the main drive for economic growth in the past decades. But a severe drop in national income in recent years, prospect of low oil prices in the years ahead, and untapped potentials in many industries all indicate that domestic demand cannot solely push the economy towards 8% economic growth.
And as Iran inches back into the international oil market, oil prices have been dropping heavily, with barrels of crude at 12-year lows over the last week. This reality is central to Rouhani's announcement that oil would make up less of the national budget than in the past. And some on the street in the country of 80 million don't see sanctions as their central problem.
I personally don't believe that it will have any effect because our economy is not related to the sanctions. Our economy is completely dependent on oil and petrochemical industries, and because international markets are stagnant and prices are very low, our country does not have a very considerable income.
The deal, which U.S. President Barack Obama's administration sees as a major foreign policy win, is not favored by the Republican-controlled Congress nor by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has suggested that Iran will still attempt to acquire nuclear capabilities and use newfound financial resources to fund terrorism abroad. But as debate continues in some circles, the deal goes forward.
For further analysis now, we are joined in studio by Mayor Javidan Far, Middle East affairs expert. Thanks very much for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
How quickly can we expect this lifting of sanctions to impact the people of Tehran and Iran?
People actually are quite pessimistic. People they were interviewing the New York Times correspondent Thomas Edbring said people in Iran are not suddenly going to the streets and celebrating because the government has year after year been promising things to them. So I think people are cynical. But I think in the next year, at least in the next 6 months, we're going to see a feel-good factor. Number one, from the return of the confidence of the international community, which will, basically push and motivate Iranians who've been hiding the money under the mattresses and not spending it to go out and spend now. A lot of people in Iran were not spending because they were waiting for sanctions to be lifted so that foreign products come to Iran, better quality products reach Iran, and then to spend their money and then to invest it. So I think at the very least we're going to see a boost in the level of investment by Iranian consumers and also by foreign companies coming to Iran to invest. I think that and opening up of the economy is expected to give 5% rise growth into Iran's economy next year. But let's see if the hardliners allow Mr. Rouhani to have a little bit of peace and quiet at home and not to challenge the West, because a big part of his new budget depends on foreign investment.
Well, you mentioned the budget. What came out of that?
Well, it's $317 billion this year. President Rouhani presented it on the day after the recent implementation day of the sanctions. He was in fact waiting for it. He's 42 days late, according to the Iranian law, in presenting his budget. It was so important for him so that the deal is signed and then to present his budget. The IRGC budget is down this year by, if I'm not mistaken, something like 20%. On other areas, the government is hoping to sell oil at 40%, $40 a barrel, and that's already a concern because right now it's $30 a barrel. And they're hoping to collect more tax money this year because only 25% of Iran's budget income comes from oil. The great majority of the rest of it comes from tax collection. So there again, it's very important for President Rouhani so that the Iranian consumer goes out and spends, that the Iranian investors start investing in Iran's community, in Iran's economy, so that tax returns are up. And it's also important for him to boost Iran's non-oil export. I think this has been yet another rude awakening, these low oil prices, that Iran mustn't be dependent on oil.
And you mentioned that they're hoping to sell it for $40 a barrel, and yet we're seeing some analysts on the street saying that this number can hit even as low as 25 in the coming months.
Yeah, this is a major concern for the government, but they're hoping that now that there's going to be the return of unfrozen funds, something like $32 billion, confidence is going to return to the Iranian currency. Confidence is going to return to the Iranian economy. And more importantly, the Iranian government very much needs foreign investment. It's very important. President Rouhani is going to France and Italy very soon. It's very important to him to attract investment. We already see that the Daimler-Benz is going to invest in Iran. Other car production companies. Iran is going to invest in its transportation sector. 114 Airbus aircraft have been ordered. It's very important for Iran to develop its tourism sector. But what President Rouhani needs more than anything is political stability, and for the IRGC and other parts of the regime not to go around challenging the West and other Arab countries in the region as they've been doing so.
All right. Well, so far, if you mention the budget here, this decline of 20% allocated to them, shouldn't this be seen as a win?
Well, I think it's the relationship between IRGC and Mr. Rouhani has not been very good. I mean, he's really stood up to them. On the one hand, yes, it's a message to the IRGC, but their budget is still twice as much as the army. Their budget, even though it's down 20%, is still twice as much, considering the fact that the army's got 3 times the manpower. The fact that the IRGC gets twice as much more money from them than the army goes to show how much power the IRGC has. So it's a message to the IRGC, but I don't think. I think that because they have their own independent sources of income, the IRGC in Iran has got its own economic arm. It's a company called Khatam al-Anbiya. They are heavily involved in infrastructure projects, in energy projects, in construction projects, in manufacturing sector. So they have their own independent space. So yes, on the one hand, although they are losing some money from the official Iranian budget, on the other hand, they have their own companies which will supply them with their funds.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being with us. Do appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
Moving on now to the rest of our coverage. China, its economy appears to be slowing now and sparking jitters for investors across the globe. And one unexpected outcome of that in China itself is the rise of labor movements. Let's take a look.
This is labor activist Zhu Xiaomei. She's teaching street cleaners in Guangzhou, southern China, about their rights. The mother of 2 was recently arrested for the crime of gathering a crowd to disturb social order and could now face up to 7 years in jail.
When the police came, I didn't know what was going on. I was really frightened. When I knew they were here to find my wife, I was quite scared.
Wu says his wife was just helping people to try and improve their working conditions. A friend of hers who spoke anonymously said she was teaching people how to address their grievances within the law.
She helped us, Xiaomei carrying her baby with her from morning to night to help us, give us knowledge. I thank her.
Her arrest comes as Beijing is cracking down on civil society in a response to a rise in labor movements attributed to a slowing down of the Chinese economy. With more strikes in 2015 than in the past 4 years combined, one Hong Kong-based NGO says Beijing is trying to put out of commission activists who may actually be the solution.
Why, you have to ask, is the central government in Beijing concerned about the activities of a small group of worker activists who are actually helping the situation? They're actually helping to resolve strike actions.
But despite the recent spate of arrests, activists are undeterred, vowing to continue encouraging industrial action no matter what.
Now to the stories we didn't want you to miss. We are joined on set by Daniel Roth. Well, what's on tap today, Daniel?
Well, today everyone's talking about the Democratic debate. It was Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, and Martin O'Malley. Though nobody's really talking about Martin O'Malley, he's really sort of off to the side. This was all about Bernie Sanders and his sort of full frontal assault, full court press. He's gaining on Hillary Clinton in New Hampshire and Iowa, as you mentioned earlier. Nationally, her lead is pretty wide. But people are really starting to talk seriously about him, and at the core of this, of course, is the way he's talking about economics, which has really forced Hillary Clinton to speak in similar terms. And, you know, they sparred on a lot of issues last night. The 3 top issues economically were their relationships to President Barack Obama and his economic record, how they've sort of helped or hindered his economic record, which they see as a positive one across the board. And they were sort of vying for who's closer to the president, who's closer to that 10% unemployment rate dropped to 5%, who's closer to bringing the country from the brink of collapse.
Well, Hillary Clinton was in Barack Obama's cabinet.
Right.
So doesn't she win points over there?
Well, so it's a good question. She's primarily dealing with foreign policy when she was in the cabinet. Bernie Sanders mentions this and mentions that he's all for Barack Obama, though they do differ on a number of fronts. The big place where they were sort of really getting into it was on their relationships with Wall Street. And this was where sort of Bernie Sanders said Barack Obama's too close to Wall Street, Hillary Clinton's too close to Wall Street. I'm really the guy who's going to take the government and break it apart from the private interests on Wall Street, as they say, the billionaire class. And now that was one of the areas where they really dug in deep. And Hillary Clinton says, look, my record's not perfect on Wall Street, but I'm ready to really take us forward in the same sort of path as Barack Obama.
And ironically enough, she does get a lot of backing from Wall Street traditionally.
Absolutely, and she does. One of the things Sanders mentioned is she took a bunch of money, $600,000 in speaking fees from Goldman Sachs. This was one of his sort of non-attack attacks. He says he's not going to attack. He does bring in a little bit of history into these debates and sort of pulling Hillary down with him to get into the real nitty-gritty.
All right, well, thank you very much for bringing this to our attention, Daniel Roth, our reporter here. That does wrap up our coverage today. Do stay tuned here every day for all your global economic coverage. I'm Natalie Ehrlich from the Jaffa Port in Tel Aviv. Thank you so much for watching.